You think my daughter is going to throw her life away on a boy who can't even afford a decent coat in January? Not in this house. Not while I'm alive. Vivienne Calloway said it the way a judge reads a sentence, not with anger, not with cruelty, but with the absolute certainty of someone who has never once been told their certainty was wrong. She said it in the front hallway of the house on Rosedale Valley Road with the snow still on Elias Owusu's collar, and her daughter standing 3 feet away doing nothing, saying nothing, her mouth open and her hands at her sides. Elias was 22. He had taken the subway from Scarborough, transferred twice, walked the last 6 minutes in January in a coat that was, in fact, not warm enough for January. He had a bouquet of tulips in one hand because the corner store didn't have roses, and he hadn't known that until he was already running late. He had planned what he would say to Vivienne Calloway for the entire 40-minute ride. He had not planned for her to say it first. He looked at Nadia. She looked at the floor. Vivienne opened the front door the way she had opened it to let him in, with the same hand, the same motion, the same expression, except this time she was not welcoming him. She was removing him. "You should go," she said, "before this becomes embarrassing for everyone." He went. He didn't say anything that cut. He didn't raise his voice. He walked back down the front steps with the tulips still in his hand, and the snow coming down the way it always came down in Toronto in February. Like it meant it, and he didn't look back at the door because he already knew what he would see, which was Nadia standing on the other side of a threshold she hadn't crossed. The subway home took 40 minutes. He did not look at his phone. He sat in the orange plastic seat with the tulips across his knees, and he made a list in his head, the way he had always done when something needed solving. He was not yet the man he would become. He was a 22-year-old black kid from Scarborough, with a second-hand coat and a pre-revenue company, and $100 in his checking account, and no particular reason to believe any of it would amount to anything. But he had always been good at lists, and the one he made on the way home from Rosedale had only a single item on it. He did not write it down. He did not need to. 2.5 years later, Elias Owusu came back to Toronto from San Francisco on a Tuesday, the way he had left, quietly and without announcement, which was the way he preferred to do everything that mattered. He flew economy because the people who really had money, he had learned, flew economy until they needed the other seat for their work. He carried one bag. He wore a coat that cost more than 3 months of his old rent, though it was designed to look as though it had simply lasted a long time. Nobody in the arrivals hall recognized him. That was still new enough to feel like a small luxury. The invisibility of a man the world has not yet been told to look at. He took the Scarlet Line to his mother's place in Scarborough first, because that was the only right order of things. His mother, Adwoa Owusu, made jollof rice and asked him twice if he'd been eating enough, and told him once that she'd seen his name in a business column, and hadn't told anyone because she didn't want to jinx it. He sat at the kitchen table where he'd done his homework for 12 years and ate the rice and told her he was fine, and she looked at him with the particular expression that mothers save for sons they know are not entirely telling the truth about fine. "You're going back downtown," she said. It wasn't a question. "I have some business," he said. She set a container of rice in his bag for the week without asking if he wanted it. He kissed her on the forehead before he left. The business was this. The logistics platform he had built in a borrowed office in San Francisco had, in the 18 months since its commercial launch, become the infrastructure that half of mid-market distribution companies in North America use to optimize their last-mile delivery. It had happened faster than his projections, which had themselves been faster than what any investor had believed was possible. He had 3 term sheets before he was 23, closed his Series A at 24, and by the time the Series B closed, he had stopped answering acquisition inquiries as a courtesy and started having his lawyer answer them as a signal. He was not famous. He was something more useful. He was the name that kept coming up in the rooms where decisions got made. The name attached to the patent that nobody had found a way around. The name that mid-sized firms whispered when they were trying to explain why their competitor had gotten faster overnight. He was 25 years old, and the company he had built in somebody else's borrowed office had just been valued at something that, when he wrote it down, still sometimes looked like a typo. None of this was why he had come back to Toronto. He had come back because Dale Coburn, his attorney, and the most straightforwardly practical person he employed, had called him 3 weeks ago to tell him that the Calloway Group's commercial real estate portfolio, the mid-sized development company that Vivienne Calloway had run for 30 years, and that her husband Gordon had built before her, was in serious distress. The short version was that the company had over-leveraged into pre-construction condo development in 2022, the market had moved sideways and then down, and the debt they were carrying had started to attract a particular kind of quiet attention from the secondary market. The long version was that over the past 14 months, a small private holding company called North Current Capital had been acquiring that debt, one position at a time, from the various institutions that had grown tired of watching the Calloway Group miss its restructuring timelines. North Current Capital was registered in Nova Scotia and had no public-facing presence. No one who'd looked into it had been able to find a name behind it. Dale was the one who'd set it up. She had been there since the beginning, since the logistics platform was still a prototype, and Elias was still explaining the concept to anyone who'd sit still long enough to hear it. She had a way of making things clean and of understanding, without being told, which things needed to be kept quiet. "We're at 61% of the outstanding debt," she told him on that call. "If they miss the March payment, we have the standing to move." He had told her to hold. He had not entirely known why he said it. He had held the phone in his San Francisco office and looked out at the bay and thought about the subway ride home in February with the tulips across his knees. And he had told Dale to hold, and she had said, "All right," the way Dale always said "all right," without editorializing, and that had been 3 weeks ago. Now he was in Toronto. He took a cab from his mother's to the condo he kept in the King West neighborhood, the one he'd bought 2 years ago as a hedge, and never spent more than 2 weeks in at a stretch. The building super, a man named Garrett who had known Elias since before he'd had anything to put in the unit, gave him a nod in the lobby that contained 30 years of Scarborough in it, and Elias nodded back. He unpacked one bag. He made coffee. He sat on the couch in the half-furnished unit and opened his laptop and looked at the Calloway Group's last public filing. And then he closed the laptop and sat with his coffee and thought about Nadia Calloway, which was the thing he had been avoiding for 3 weeks. He had not come back to find her. He told himself this clearly and without sentiment, the way a man tells himself things he means. He had come back because North Current Capital had a decision to make, and the decision required him to be here. Nadia was a consequence of the geography, not the reason for the trip. He almost believed it. The Calloway Group's flagship project, a mixed-use development in Liberty Village they called the Meridian, was behind schedule and over budget in the way that large construction projects get behind schedule and over budget when the people managing them are managing too many other things at once. Elias knew this from the filings and from 3 conversations with a contractor Dale had quietly introduced him to. What he did not know, until he walked the site on his second morning back, was that the project manager listed on the Meridian's permit applications was Nadia Calloway. He had not looked that up. He wanted to be clear about that, at least to himself. He had not looked it up. He found it out because he was standing on the mezzanine level of the Meridian's construction trailer reviewing the permit binders with a site supervisor named Felix, and Nadia walked in. She was wearing a high-vis vest over a down jacket and carrying a rolled site plan under her arm, and her hair was pulled back in the way that means someone has been at a job site since early and intends to keep being at one. She stopped when she saw him the way a person stops when their brain is catching up to their eyes. He watched her do it. The calculation, the working jacket, the binders, the fact that he was in her site trailer at 9 in the morning looking at her permit records. "Elias," she said. He had prepared for something. He had not prepared for the particular way she said it, not with anger, Not with shock exactly, but with the kind of careful steadiness that a person constructs over years out of something that used to not be steady at all. "Nadia," he said. And then, because there was a site supervisor in the room and because he was not, in fact, a carpenter, he said, "I'm here doing some due diligence on the mechanical systems contract. Third-party review." Felix was walking me through the permit history. It was not a lie, precisely. It was the truth arranged to exclude everything that made it interesting. She looked at Felix. Felix looked at his clipboard. She looked back at Elias. She said to Felix. Felix left with the gratitude of a man who has read the room correctly. When he was gone, the trailer was quiet enough that Elias could hear the wind off the lake. Nadia set the site plan on the desk and put both hands flat on it and looked at him the way she had not, 2.5 years ago, looked at him from the other side of the front door. "What are you doing here?" she said. Not a question. "Due diligence," he said. "On what?" "The project." "For who?" He held her eyes. "I can't get into that yet." The yet landed between them. He saw it land. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, someone ran a circular saw and the sound came through the trailer walls in waves. She looked down at the site plan, then back up. "You look different," she said. "It's the coat," he said. Something moved in her face. Not quite a smile. Not quite, not one. "Get out of my trailer," she said. "And tell whoever you're doing due diligence for that the mechanical contract is clean. The problems on this project are not in the permits." He picked up his bag. He was almost at the door when she said his name again. "You should know," she said. "I know the project is in trouble. I've known for 6 months. And the people who made it troubled are not the people who are going to answer for it." He stopped. He didn't turn around. "I know that too," he said. He left. The problems on the Meridian, as Elias had already learned from Dale's review and now confirmed in 3 days of quiet fieldwork, were not in the permits or the mechanical contract or even, really, in the construction. The problems were in the procurement. Vivienne Calloway had given her nephew, a man named Patrick Vale, the oversight role on the Meridian's subcontracting. And Patrick Vale had been using that oversight in the way that people use oversight when no one is checking the oversight. To route contracts to companies that shared a postal code with his personal holding company, to approve change orders for scope additions that appeared nowhere in the site records, and to invoice for materials deliveries that the inventory logs did not support. The numbers, when Dale laid them out in a clean document, came to something over $800,000 over 14 months. It was not sophisticated. It was simply quiet, and quiet was enough because the only person above Patrick was Vivienne, and Vivienne had not built a 30-year real estate portfolio by reading invoices line by line. She had built it by reading people, and she had decided that her nephew was family, which in her vocabulary meant trustworthy, which meant she did not look at what he was doing with her trust. Elias looked at the numbers for a long time on a Wednesday night in the King West condo. He had seen this before, not the specifics, but the shape of it. The shape of a person being set up to carry something they didn't put there, because Patrick's name was nowhere on the final approvals. Nadia's was. She was the project manager. The documents flowed through her desk. She had signed what she'd been told to sign, the way a project manager signs things when the financial oversight is someone else's job, and the someone else has arranged the paperwork to look unremarkable. When the Meridian fell, and it would fall, the math was already done. It would fall on Nadia's signature, not on Patrick's, not on Vivienne's, on the only Calloway who had actually shown up to the job every morning and tried to make it work. Elias sat with that fact for the length of a full pot of coffee. Then he wrote the memo. He did it the way Dale had taught him to do anything that would eventually be read in a room he wasn't in. Precisely, without adverb, with every number sourced and every discrepancy dated. He built the case from the vendor registrations backward through the approval chain to the invoices, and by the time he was done it was 3 in the morning, and the document was 17 pages, and anyone who read it would understand within the first 4 what Patrick Vale had done, and why the project manager's signature was not the signature that should concern anyone. He emailed it to a generic account he had set up that morning. Then he went and stood in the kitchen for a while and drank a glass of water and told himself he had done what anyone with the information would have done. That it had nothing to do with Nadia specifically, that he would have done the same for any project manager in her position. He told himself this for a fairly long time. In the morning, he found an envelope on the Meridian's project manager desk. He had a site pass, it was not difficult. And he left it there without a note. Just the memo, just the numbers, just the logic. He had excellent handwriting. He had always had excellent handwriting. He did not sign the document, but he wrote her name on the envelope by hand. And he understood, standing in the empty trailer at 7 in the morning before the crew arrived, that he was not being careless. Nadia Calloway read the memo in one sitting. She did not come to find him. That was the first thing that told Elias she was not the persons he had last seen, standing at the front door saying nothing. For 3 days, she said nothing to anyone visible. She came to the site earlier than usual and stayed later. Through the trailer window, Elias had been back on the site in a different capacity, reviewing a structural report that Felix had flagged. He watched her pull the original vendor registrations, watched her lay the invoices against the delivery logs, watched her make a spreadsheet that she did not share with anyone. She was not taking his word for it. She was building the case herself from the foundation. He had handed her a thread. She was refusing to pull on it until she had inspected every inch of it. On the 4th day, she called a project meeting. Elias was not in it, but the trailer walls were single pane and the site was between pours. He heard her tell the site superintendent and the construction lender's representative that she was suspending payments on 4 vendor contracts, pending a documentation review, that she was requesting a forensic audit of all change orders approved in the last 16 months. And that she was doing this as project manager on the basis that the documentation did not support the invoices. Patrick's voice, when it came, was the voice of a man whose plan has always relied on the assumption that the person above him will not read the plan. He said she didn't have the standing. She said the project management agreement gave her standing over contract approvals, and she intended to use it. He said her mother had approved the procurement structure. She said her mother would want to know why the procurement structure had generated $800,000 in undelivered materials. The meeting went quiet. Elias stood in the March cold outside the trailer with a coffee going cold in his hand and understood that she had just done something that would cost her, and done it anyway, on her own authority, from her own evidence, and that the thing he felt standing there was not the satisfaction of a plan advancing. It was something else entirely, and it had not been in any of his projections. She found him at the site that afternoon. Not through the trailer window, not in the context of a work conversation. She walked across the site directly toward him the way a person walks when they have stopped calculating the appearance of things. "I know it was you," she said, stopping 2 feet away. "The handwriting. I know," he said. "Who are you doing due diligence for?" He looked at her. The wind off the lake was doing what wind off Lake Ontario does in March, which is to remind you that winters is only technically over. She was watching him with the same careful steadiness from the trailer. It was not the expression of a woman who expected to be managed. "I can't answer that the way you're asking it," he said. "Then answer it a different way." He didn't say anything for a moment. A forklift moved behind them. "The person I'm working for," he said carefully, "has an interest in how this project resolves, and in whether the person whose name is on the paperwork is treated fairly when it does." She looked at him for a long time. "The memo saved my project," she said. "Not my mother's project. Mine. The work I've actually been doing for 2 years while Patrick was doing whatever Patrick was doing." She paused. "You knew that. I knew it. You could have sat on it. If the project fell, my mother's company falls with it. That's what somebody in your position would want. I'm not in that position for the reasons you think. Then what position are you in?" He said. "I came back to Toronto to make a decision about a company that's in trouble, and I've been making it slowly because there's a person attached to that company who didn't put it in trouble, and I couldn't figure out how to do what I came to do without doing it to her." The wind moved between them. "That person being me." Nadia said. Yes. She looked away, toward the lake, toward the half-built frame of the meridian rising behind them. She was quiet long enough that he thought she was going to walk away. Come for dinner, she said. Not to my mother's. My place. 6:30. She left before he could answer, which was, he understood the answer. Her apartment was in Leslieville, the second floor of a Victorian semi she rented from an older couple downstairs. It was full of books and had a decent kitchen and smelled like the particular combination of coffee and paint that comes from someone who has been living alone with intention for a while. She had made chicken stew the way her grandmother had taught her, and she poured him a glass of wine, and they sat at the kitchen table and ate for a while without talking about any of it. Because some meals need to just be meals first, she said. Eventually. 2.5 years ago, I let her do it. He waited. I stood there, in my own house. I let her open the door and I didn't say a word. She wrapped both hands around her wine glass. I've thought about that 1,000 times. I was 23. I had never in my life made a decision she didn't have some form of authority over. And I stood there and I let her decide. You were 23, he said. That's not an excuse. I know. I'm not offering it as one. She looked at him. Are you angry? He thought about the 40-minute subway ride. The tulips. The list with one item. I was angry for a long time, he said. I turned it into something. That's the truest thing I can tell you about the last 2.5 years. What did you turn it into? He set down his fork. He looked at the table, at the kitchen, at the woman across from it. I need to tell you something, he said, and I need you to hear all of it before you react to any of it. Because some of it is going to sound like one thing and it's actually another thing, and the only way I can show you the difference is if you let me finish. She said, okay. He told her. All of it. The night on the subway, the list, the San Francisco office and the platform and the growth rate and the patents, the Series A and the Series B and what the valuation said when you wrote it down. Dale, North Current Capital, 61% of the Calloway Group's outstanding debt, acquired quietly over 14 months, one position at a time. He watched her face do the arithmetic. He did not try to soften it. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet. The couple downstairs had their television on. A streetcar went by outside on Queen. Nadia was looking at her wine glass. You came back to take my mother's company, she said. I came back to hold the debt, he said. Which is different, and also not that different. And the memo was... He stopped, started again. The memo was me finding out that the thing I'd been planning to let fall was going to fall on the wrong person, and not being able to make myself feel good about that. She was quiet for a long moment. You could have told me, she said, that night when I called you before the site. You already had 61%. You knew everything. I know. You let me think you were, what? A consultant. A person passing through. Yes, while holding the debt on my family's company. Yes. He did not soften it. She deserved the plain shape of it. Why are you telling me now? She said. Because Dale called me last week. Your mother has found out enough to know something is happening. She's going to move before we do. She's going to try to sell the controlling interest to an outside party before whoever is circling can close. If she does that in the next 10 days, 3 years of work goes sideways and your name is still on the Meridian paperwork and you still carry the audit. She looked up. I can stop it, he said, but I can't stop it quietly anymore. I'd have to walk into whatever room your mother moves in and say out loud who I am and what North Current is. And if I do that, he held her eyes. You'd find out the same way your mother does in a boardroom. And that felt wrong. The streetcar went by again. It is wrong, she said. I know. I'm telling you now because I'd rather lose it than have you find out that way. She looked at him for a long time the way she had in the trailer, the inventory look. The look that was not the look from the front door. Tell me the rest, she said. All of it. What happens if you walk into that room? He told her. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she got up and put the dishes in the sink and stood with her back to him for a moment, and then she turned around. My mother did a terrible thing to you, she said, and I'm not going to pretend that what you built wasn't partly built out of that. I'm also not going to pretend that the thing you built isn't real, or that what you did with the memo wasn't real. She paused. I need you to do one thing. Name it. Whatever happens in that room, whatever you do with North Current. I need you to do it as yourself, not as a hammer. As a person who gets to decide what his own name means. He looked at her. He did not say anything for a moment. Okay, he said. Vivienne Calloway moved on a Thursday. By 8 in the morning, Dale had the call. Vivienne had used the previous night to assemble enough of the family's internal shares and allied investors to call an emergency meeting of the Calloway Group's board. Her agenda was the rapid sale of controlling interest to a pre-identified buyer, and the meeting was at 10 o'clock in the offices on Bay Street that Gordon Calloway had put the family name on in 1991. Elias had 45 minutes. He called Dale and said, "We're going in." He dressed in the way that a man dresses when he needs a room to understand something quickly. Not loudly, not expensively in a visible way. He wore a suit that was cut for him and had been cut once. He took a cab because parking on Bay Street was not worth the time. In the cab, he sent one text to Nadia. It said, "I'm going in this morning. You don't have to be there. But I thought you should know." She replied in 40 seconds. It said, "I'm already on my way." The Calloway Group's boardroom was on the 14th floor, glass on two sides, a view of the lake if you stood at the right angle. Vivienne Calloway was already at the head of the table when Elias and Dale came in. She was dressed the way she always dressed, carefully and in full authority, and she looked at the two people who had just walked through the door with the expression of a woman who has been expecting something and is deciding how large to be about it. Patrick Vale was to her right, pale and avoiding eye contact with the door. 3 other board members Elias recognized from the company's filings, and Nadia, who had gotten there before him, sitting alone 2/3 of the way down the table with a folder in front of her, and the particular stillness of a woman who has decided she is not leaving. "This is a closed meeting," Vivienne said. "I don't know who authorized. My name is Dale Coburn," Dale said. She set her folio on the table with a sound like a period at the end of a long sentence. "I'm counsel to the controlling creditor of the entities holding the Calloway Group's outstanding debt. My client asked me to be here before the board votes on anything this morning. I'd recommend you hear what I have to say." She opened the folio. She did not hurry. She laid out the acquisition history of North Current Capital across 31 months, the debt positions, the institutional assignments, the quiet accumulation of paper that, individually, had meant nothing, and that together meant one thing very clearly. She laid out the percentage. She laid out what it meant for any vote called that morning. As of the close of business yesterday, Dale said, North Current Capital holds 61% of the Calloway Group's outstanding debt, giving our client effective blocking authority over any material transaction, including the sale of controlling interest proposed for this morning's agenda. Any such sale requires our client's consent. Our client does not consent. The room was quiet. One of the board members, a silver-haired woman named Hartwell, who had known Vivienne for 20 years, was looking at the documents with an expression Elias recognized as the expression of someone whose certainty has just become a question. Vivienne's eyes moved to him, not to Dale, to him. "Who is your client?" she said. "You've met him before," Dale said. "Briefly, about 2.5 years ago." Vivienne looked at Elias. She looked at him the way she had looked at him in the front hallway of the house on Rosedale Valley Road, with the absolute certainties of someone who has already decided what they're seeing, except that this time the certainty had a crack in it, and she could not locate the crack, and that frightened her more than anything Dale had laid on the table. "The boy with the tulips," she said. It was not a question. It was the sound of an architecture failing. Elias stepped forward. "You decided that night that you knew what I was," he said. "You looked at a black kid from Scarborough in a bad coat with flowers from a corner store, and you decided the whole story. You decided I was a risk. You decided I was the kind of person who comes in wanting something and leaves having taken it." He paused. "I understand why you decided that. I've read enough about how you built this company to understand what you were afraid of. But you decided it about me without evidence, and it cost you 2.5 years, and this room." He turned to the table. "The meeting agenda is withdrawn," he said. North Current is not selling, not transferring, and not looking for a new buyer. What we're looking for is a restructuring. A real one, not a fire sale. He looked at Hartwell, then at the other board members. Before we talk about what that looks like, the board should know that the Meridian's cost overruns are not the result of market conditions. They are the result of procurement fraud. Ms. Coburn has a summary document. I'd recommend the board read it before making any decisions about management accountability. Patrick Vale stood up. He said something about process and procedure. Nobody at the table appeared to hear him. Dale set the second document on the table. She said it without ceremony, the way she said everything. Vivienne looked at it. She looked at Patrick. Something moved through her face that was not readable as any single emotion. "Sit down, Patrick," she said. Her voice was flat. He sat down. The meeting took 2 hours. At the end of it, the proposed sale was formally withdrawn. The forensic audit of the Meridian's procurement was authorized. Patrick Vale's signatory authority was suspended pending the audit results, and Nadia's project management agreement was affirmed and expanded. Vivienne Calloway sat at the head of the table through all of it. She did not leave. She did not make a scene. She voted when the vote came. She was, Elias observed, a woman who had built something real over 30 years, and whatever else was true about her, she was not going to let it fall because her pride required her to refuse the only option left. When the board members filtered out and Dale went to collect her folio, Vivienne was still in her chair. The lake was visible through the glass on the south side, gray and enormous. "You could have done this differently," she said. Not to Dale. To Elias. "You could have called. You could have sent a letter. You could have forced the sale and walked away with the asset, and I would never have known your name." "I know," he said. "Why didn't you?" He thought about it, honestly, the way the question deserved. "Because the point was never to take it," he said. "The point was for you to understand what you threw out the door, and you can't understand that from a letter." She was quiet for a moment. Outside Bay Street was doing what Bay Street does at noon. "The memo," she said, "the one that saved the Meridian audit, that was you. Yes, you could have let it fall. If the Meridian failed, the company failed. I know. But Nadia's name was on it." He looked at Vivienne Calloway across the boardroom table, at the woman who had looked at him in a front hallway and decided what he was, and who was now working through the arithmetic of what he had actually turned out to be. He could see it happening. The old certainty, the one organized around fear dressed up as judgment, sitting in pieces in front of her. "Yes," he said. "Her name was on it." Vivienne did not weep. She was not that kind of woman. But something left her face that had been there for a very long time. "I was wrong about you," she said. The words came out like something she had been carrying in a closed hand for 2.5 years. "I was wrong about you the night I opened that door, and I built a great deal on top of that mistake." Elias looked at her. He thought of his mother's kitchen, the rice, the 40-minute subway ride. He thought of the coat. "Yes," he said, "you were." He let it sit. He did not add to it. He did not need to. "Nadia did that herself," he said after a moment. "The case she built on the Meridian. She did that before I walked into any boardroom." Whatever happens with restructuring, the board needs to understand that. She didn't need saving. She needed the fraud documented, which is different. Vivienne looked down the table to where Nadia was still sitting, watching the two of them, and something passed between the mother and daughter that was not yet forgiveness, and was not yet repair, but was possibly the first honest silence they had sat in together in a very long time. The restructuring took 4 months. North Current converted a portion of its debt position to equity on terms that gave Nadia operational authority over the Meridian and 2 other active projects, and that gave Vivienne a continuing role as board chair on the condition that the audit's recommendations were implemented in full. Patrick Vale was quietly removed from all project roles and did not contest the terms, which was how it usually went when the documentation was this clean. The Meridian topped out in October. Nadia was on site for it, in the same high-vis vest, with a different kind of stillness in her, not the careful kind, the built kind, the kind that comes from having done something under your own name and having it hold. Elias was there because she had asked him to be. He stood near the edge of the crowd of trades and engineers and watched her shake hands with the structural engineer and the site super and a city councilor who had shown up for the photo. And he thought about the fact that she had built that moment herself, brick by brick, from evidence she had gathered alone in a site trailer, and that no one looking at her could argue otherwise. Later, when the crowd had thinned, she found him near the fence at the edge of the site looking south toward the lake. North Current still holds the equity, she said. It does. You could run this company. You have the votes. I could, he said. I'm not going to. She looked at him. I came back to Toronto thinking I had one thing to do, he said. I thought I was coming back to show your mother what she'd thrown out, and I did that. But somewhere between the permit binders and the chicken stew, it stopped being the main thing. He turned to face her. I don't want to run your family's company. I want to have built the thing that lets you run it without anyone standing over you deciding what you're allowed to. Nadia was quiet for a moment. The lake was its October color, the kind of gray that looks cold even from a distance. You should have told me, she said, that night at my apartment. You should have told me when you still had the option to lose everything by telling me. I know I needed to know I was choosing you and not just walking into the last act of something. I know that too, he said. I told myself I'd find a better moment. There isn't one. There's only the moment where you decide to trust someone with the thing that could end you, and then there's all the other moments which are smaller. The wind off the lake moved between them. That was my failure, he said. Not yours. I kept the secret because I was afraid that the truth in the same room as all of it would make the truth disappear. I was wrong. I should have trusted you to hold both things. She looked at him for a long time. She looked at him the way she had in the trailer, and at the dinner table, and in none of those looks was there any resemblance to the woman standing at the front door. 2.5 years ago, saying nothing. She reached out and took his hand. Not gently, firmly, the way you take hold of something you mean to keep. Don't do it again, she said. No, he said. They stood at the fence at the edge of the Meridian site, with the lake going gray and the city going on around them, and there was nothing between them anymore that needed negotiating. Just the future, just the ground they were standing on, which they had both, in their separate ways, done the work to get to. Back in the boardroom they had shared 4 months ago, Vivienne Calloway was at her desk reviewing the audit committee's final report. She read it line by line. She had not read documents line by line in 30 years, and the habit of it was strange to her, and she intended to keep it. She thought about the boy with the tulips, and about the man in the boardroom, and about the distance between those two versions of the same person, a distance she had created and he had crossed, not toward her, but toward her daughter, and not in spite of everything she had done, but without letting it become the only thing that defined him. She thought about her own version of that distance, and how much of her life she had spent on the wrong side of it, and whether it was too late to walk across. She closed the report. She picked up the phone. She called Nadia, which she had not done in the way a mother calls a daughter in a very long time. Nadia answered on the second ring. I'm reading the audit, Vivienne said. I think you should see the section on vendor approvals before the board meeting. There was a pause. Then Nadia said, I'll come by tomorrow morning. Good, Vivienne said. I'll make coffee. It was not much. It was not forgiveness, not yet, not the kind that arrives whole. But it was a door left open instead of closed, and sometimes that is the most honest thing a person can offer. Outside on Bay Street, Toronto went on the way Toronto goes on. Forward, practical, without sentiment about the winter coming, which was coming anyway and which, like most hard things, would eventually end. And in the story of Elias Owusu and Nadia Calloway, and the woman who had once decided what he was worth before he had the chance to show her, that is perhaps where the ending belongs. Not in the boardroom, not in the moment of reversal, but in two people standing at a fence in October, equal unencumbered, looking at the same lake. What a person is worth is not decided in a hallway. It is decided in the years that follow the hallway, in what a person does with the door that was shut in their face and the coat that wasn't warm enough in the 40-minute ride home. Elias Owusu decided with his, and he came back.